All right, so what we're going to talk about today is the AP exam that you'll be taking. So they released details on what the AP exam is going to look like. Our AP statistics exam is now on Friday, May 22nd. I think it used to be on the 11th. This is the same day as two other exams that we don't offer, so it should be the only exam you have that day. The AP statistics exam is going to be 2 questions. You can find all of this on the AP website if you want to look up how they have everything written out and some more information about exactly how testing will look. And unlike how the AP exam would work, normally you can only work on question 1 when you have your question 1 time and only work on question 2, so you can't go back and forth between the two. So you're going to have to answer question 1 and then answer question 2. Question 1 is the longer of the two. This one they're giving you 25 minutes to do. And question 2 they're giving you 15 minutes. Once you finish, they're going to give you 5 minutes to upload your response. And so question 1 is worth more just by slightly. This is 55% and this is 45%. These are probably going to be like the longer sorts of FRQs that we've seen in the past. So more than likely, we've done a couple, especially in this unit that we're on right now, where we just do like an inference test. It's more than likely going to be a question where you have to talk about probability and inference and a confidence interval. So it's going to ask you about more than one thing at a time. They're saying 2 or 3 skills in each question. This only covers their units 1 through 7, and so that's 1 through 10 for us. So the unit we're on right now is the last one that will be included on the exam. I'm going to post Khan Academy stuff, like I said, for 11 and 12. However, we're just going to do them for homework. We're going to spend, once we finish Unit 10, our next one, we're just going to spend all of our class time working on these free response questions, especially because there's only 2. So you're really going to have to nail them to get these points. Neither one of these is going to be like a question 6. They're not going to do an investigative task. So this should be more like the traditional AP statistics FRQs that we've been doing, where they're not expecting you to really extrapolate information. So what we're going to do now is look through some resources that I'm uploading to Google Classroom today for you. This is supposed to be open note, so you will be able to access this stuff as you take this. I would also suggest, if you want to do well on this exam, it's going to be super important that you create a shortcut guide for yourself. Anything that you think you need to know, write it on a sheet, keep it organized, make sure you know exactly where to look. Don't waste your time. 25 minutes seems like a lot, but it's really not. It's going to be exceptionally important that you show your work for these, because I think that given that this is open note, they're really not going to take anything where you don't explicitly write out your work. They're also giving you almost, for this first one, double the time they would normally give you to do a problem. So they're really looking for correct, thorough work, I would assume. It looks like I will get your responses 2 days after you take your test, so that I could potentially use it for our course grade. So we're going to look through some things that I'm posting for you. So one thing that I would say is super helpful is the stat inference summary table. So this is really good. It's got a quick guide to all of the tests that we'll use. And so we won't be using where is it? this chi-squared. So this is not on the test. But all the other stuff are things that we've talked about or what we're talking about on our next unit. So it's got like your confidence interval for a mean. When you know sigma, it's going to be a z-test, and then it gives you your conditions to check, and then how to do it in your calculator. It also does a hypothesis test. And so these, remember, it's important only when we know sigma. Most of the time when it's a mean, we're doing a t-test. So this is the one we're doing most often, is this guy. More than likely you're here or here for means. Then it does the same thing for proportions, and it gives you your formulas. You want to write down these formulas and plug them in. It even gives you your degrees of freedom for your t-test. Gives you your conditions. Make sure you check those and that you write your sentence. Then it also does for a difference. And then it gives you what we would write out. And we're going to talk about this in our next unit. So this is for 2 samples, which is unit 10 for us. And then a test for proportions. So we have test for mean and confidence interval for mean. And so this is also not going to be on the test because that is unit 9, I think, in the AP. Is confidence intervals for linear regression. So this is also not on the exam, so you don't need this box. If you want to, what I recommend doing is taking your sheet and putting a X through these boxes that we're not going to use, so you don't even bother reading them, and then highlight anything or box or circle things on this page that you need to remember. You might want to write yourself a little note that's like, write about them. Might also be useful to write a note to yourself about what your conclusion statement should look like. Remember to do your 4-step process: state, plan, do, conclude. Make sure you include all 4 steps. Don't leave anything off. It's imperative, especially because there's only 2 questions, that you do all of the steps. And down here is just a legend of sort of what do these variables mean, and what they mean up here, as well as matched pairs. Matched pairs we talked about at the end of our last unit. That's when we can like actually match 2 things together, and we can test a difference instead of doing it, because it's not a 2 sample, it'd still be 1 sample. Okay, and then show that they're met. Don't just list them. So I find this sheet to be super helpful for all of the stuff that we're doing in these last units. I would be surprised if one of the 2 questions is not some sort of confidence interval or hypothesis test situation, just because it covers 2 full units for the AP exam. Actually, I think it covers 3. This is about just AP study hints. Some of these aren't going to be as helpful. You really want to read through these general tips for writing free response answers, because that's what we're looking at. And so understanding what you're supposed to be doing. Make sure you read through these. This use vocabulary carefully is super important. You also need to know sort of what vocabulary means. And then it's just got some helpful hints, including remember like how to describe data, remember to do socks when we're supposed to do socks. I would read through this today. The other thing I would make sure to look at is this AP FRQ survival guide. Read through this. Now this is not so important because that's not how it works anymore, but make sure that you read through this and that you know exactly what these words mean. So like, what does choose mean? When our FRQ asks you to choose between 2 things, you must state why you chose one and why you did not choose the other option. It's extremely important to take a stand. Don't try to say that both are good or both are bad. It's not a compare and contrast question. They want you to make a choice and justify. Compare, remember we've talked about this before, compare means you need to actually use compare words. And you need to compare, especially if you're comparing distributions, you need to compare their SOCs. So compare medians to medians, quartiles to quartiles, ranges to ranges, shapes to shapes. Like actually compare. Use comparison words like larger, smaller, higher, lower, etc. When they say refer to a previous answer, for example, using your answer in part A, explain, it means you actually need to use that in your answer. Make sure you state it. Use your justification should be based on part A, either the number or the concept. Construct and interpret a confidence interval. Here are our steps and everything that we need to do. Is there convincing statistical evidence that blank is different or whatever? That's a hypothesis test, so we need to make sure we do all of these things. If you have a residual plot, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that more than likely I doubt you will, especially because they've taken off the hypothesis test question or material for regression. So I would say if you find yourself running low on time and you're going to leave off a review unit, leave off your regressions, and make sure you really hammer down on probability would be my big guess. Make sure if you do have one, that you describe your scatter plot appropriately. Normal distributions, when you describe a distribution, make sure you're doing SOCs, shape, outliers, center, spread. Make sure you include anything that's specifically interesting. This part is not as interesting because we don't have number 6 anymore. Do answer one part at a time. Focus on the part that you're working on now. Don't get overwhelmed with all of the other parts. Just focus on the task at hand. And then always restate the question asked in your FRQ answer. Use their specific wording so you don't make a mistake. And make sure you use correct vocabulary when we're working with a statistic versus a parameter. Make sure you use mean, mu, or x-bar depending on the situation. And make sure you're showing your work and drawing your pictures. If you want, there are some websites that will help you identify some different types of FRQs to sort of help you look at a problem and be able to identify what you're supposed to do from that. And then there's some more information about AP FRQs in here. So really make sure we're looking at our FRQ stuff. There's some more stuff in here. This is like more on hypothesis tests. So when do we do what we're doing? And proportions. Remember, we're only going to do a z-test for means if sigma is known, which is unlikely. Then we would do a z-test. More than likely, we're just going to do a t-test for a mean. Proportions is always a z-test. We don't ever do a t-test for proportions. Categorical data, we're not doing this on the AP exam. We'll look at it, but we're not going to do it. If you take AP Bio at any point, you'll go back to chi-squared tests. This has our test statistics and everything else on it. This is also on the other sheet that we talked about, but if you prefer this format, then it's here. Again, we're not going to be doing this one for the AP exam. Here are definitions of symbols that we use, in case you need a reminder. Confidence interval formulas. And common z-star values, if you want to look up something really quickly. Remember, we can't do a table of common t-star values because they depend on our sample size. The last thing is this inference flowchart, which is just another sort of representation of how our inference, like our tests and our confidence intervals, go. If you prefer the information like this, then you can use this. The thing that this has on it that the others don't have is this p-value, type 1 error, type 2 error, and power guide. That might be useful. And these two boxes are the two that are getting left off the AP exam this year. Okay. So I would highly suggest that you go through and really start building your own guide to help you through this. One of the big things that you're going to want to do is probability. Get all of your probability stuff together so you remember all of those rules. And just make sure that we keep pushing forward. We're going to just keep going until we can kind of get it.